Tuesday evening. This is One-on-One with me, Denver Kisting. This is a program dedicated to bringing you newsmakers, movers and shakers who are making the news and who are in the news. My guest tonight is Daisry Mathias, Presidential Advisor on Youth Matters and Enterprise Development. Good evening and welcome. Good evening to you too, Ms. Mathias, and welcome to One-on-One.
Good evening, Denver. Thank you for having me.
First things first, you were appointed in 2015. Now 6 years down the line, what would you say are the key accomplishments in firstly shining a light and addressing, secondly, the socioeconomic challenges faced by members of the youth?
Yeah, it's been 6 years. On the 29th of June, it will be 6 years exactly, and it has been a tremendous growing curve, supporting the president as he executes his constitutional mandate and day-to-day administrative work in the private office. President Geingob has been likened to Theodore Delano Roosevelt as a crisis president. From the moment he came into office, it's been one crisis after another, from the drought to the economic slowdown that led to subdued growth, to the climate change induced weather conditions that were adverse, whether it's drought or floods or migratory red locusts, and now to the public health emergency. So these issues are not mutually exclusive. Youth matters and economic development and enterprise development is all included in, these dimensions of development. My work has been really to support the president in providing leadership, interpreting the president's policy directives, fundamentally as an intra-governmental stakeholder, working with the different sectors. I have a critical mass of ministers who are responsible for youth matters, another handful of ministers responsible for the economic sectors, and mainstreaming the youth agenda within the government agenda, putting it front and center, amplifying it, elevating it, and ensuring that we're speaking a common language as far as youth development and empowerment is concerned.
Your role is a critical one. We do know that young people represent a major demographic, 850,000 people to be exact. What would you say is the role of young people towards development of this country?
So I think President Geingob was very intentional in his innovation to create the position of a youth advisor in the private office. My role is a first in the country, a first on the continent. I'm the only youth advisor in Africa at the moment, according to the African Union. And he's done this because it's the premium that he places on youth development and empowerment is beyond political rhetoric and sounding politically correct. It's really a matter of imperative, political imperative, social imperative, economic imperative. It's about sustainable development and inclusivity, and realizing that we need to prepare young people to be able to become the custodians of our social, political, economic governance architecture. And, a large demographic majority has a meaningful role to play, Denver, in not only implementing and championing programs of development, but holding elected leaders accountable to the commitments that have been made.
It's one thing to acknowledge the critically important role of this constituency. It's something else to create a favorable political and economic environment. What would you say about the state of the political and economic environment at the moment, making it possible for the youth to contribute to the development of the country?
I think history will teach us that whenever there's been a political crisis and an economic crisis coinciding, it can become dangerous for society. As far back as the 1930s with the rise of fascism, or if we look at the Arab Springs, extreme levels of youth unemployment can become a source for social upheaval or fragility. And what President Geingob has done from the onset, he was elected with an overwhelming majority, and it was young people who gave him that vote of confidence, is he has mainstreamed youth participation through a lot of political appointments. Not only youth, but I think we could look at political inclusion, gender inclusion, and then youth, the demographic profile, has really been intentional to make pathways for young people to have access to governance institutions and to be exposed through learning and to make a contribution to national institutions of governance and the highest levels of decision making, really.
Do the numbers reflect the reality? Because we often hear that the youth are not invited to sit at the table where decisions are being made affecting them directly.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a reality that the young people are underrepresented in decisions in positions of decision making. But having been in this position and having been exposed to the entire public service, I'm also quick to throw a disclaimer that the political interface looks very different from the public servant. And out of 117,000 public servants, there's a lot of young people who are writing the policy documents, people who are writing key policy statements for the politicians, young people responsible for the execution, implementation of government programs. So it's not always a representation, what we see as a political interface, to really the people who are responsible for the implementation of some of these government programs.
But where are the actual figures to back that up? We hear many young people, we hear a lot of young people, but where are the figures to back that up?
Well, statistically, it can be accounted for. The data exists.
After a tweet by you in 2020, following the visit to Namibia by the AU envoy on youth, the following was posted. Too bad that you have failed the Namibian youth completely. Youth unemployment is 50% and youth business is getting no support. What do you make of such sentiments?
My position is one that I have embraced. It's a very challenging position because of the challenges that affect the sector. I started off by highlighting some of the economic contextual circumstances that met us as we assumed office. Despite the good plans that we had at the launch of the first HPP, the Harambee Prosperity Plan, it was almost as if the bird's wings were cut off before she could take off because of so many independent intervening variables. Those reactions, to me, I take them really as public accountability and as an expression of the frustration of the young people of my generation. It's not something that I take personally. It has been a charge and a call to action in order for us to do better. It's unfortunate that that kind of criticism goes out in the public space because I saw that particular incident as a missed opportunity. Africa was shining the spotlight on Namibia as a governance best practice for the innovation that we had, created, but we were unable to embrace that, and instead we decided to self-critique, and these kinds of self-destructive tendencies are really becoming a normalized culture that I think we need to highlight.
Self-destructive on whose part?
In terms of attacking public servants within the public domain, I find it slightly ironic that we use social media for such good, anti-violence campaigns, human rights empowerment campaigns, and anti-GBV protests. But we use the same platforms to hurl the same type of violence against our public servants. And I think we do need to begin to reflect on that kind of disincentive that keeps young people actually out of political office and public office, keeps the competent out.
We'll take a short break. We'll be right back with One on One. Welcome back. This is One on One with me, Daisry Kisting. This evening we're engaging Daisry Mathias. She's the Presidential Advisor on Youth Affairs and Enterprise Development. Daisry, you were also involved in drafting the second Harambee Prosperity Plan. You touched on the first plan. Now, the second plan was launched by the President in March this year. Describe how did you help to keep the youth at the center of economic development?
Both the first HPP and the second HPP are priority programs of the President that were crafted really in the Office of the President through broad-based extensive stakeholder consultations, including the President's town hall meetings. Throughout that process, different subject matter experts made their contributions, and my role was to ensure that the youth had a platform and an opportunity to inform the policy priority and help the government to design tomorrow together. And through that process, now for the second one, we did a lot of public consultations where thematically we reviewed the first HPP, and we solicited some of the emerging contemporary social issues affecting young people and the opportunities for inclusion. And to that end, we made sure that the youth priority and the youth agenda was central too. I made sure that the document reflects the aspiration, the opportunity, the challenges that are facing young people. And, you know, it doesn't always have to say youth for it to be a youth matter. Housing is a youth matter. Education is a youth matter. Economic advancement is a youth matter. Health matters affect young people. GBV affects young people. And these are all the contemporary issues that have been inputted by young people and are elevated and amplified in the current priority program.
What do you do? What does your office do about these contemporary social issues affecting young people?
So beyond the policy design, beyond the inclusion into national development programs, our responsibility now is implementation oversight. As you are aware, the Office of the President does not implement the national development programs. It is an oversight and a coordinating function. The sector responsible for the development agenda are the ones who have the treasury resources to implement the programs. What we have done is created institutional capacity through the establishment of a performance delivery unit that will be responsible for monitoring, evaluation, reporting, and making sure that we're hitting the key targets that we have committed ourselves to. Things like jobs targets, time frames, ensuring that there are no cost overruns and that we're able to create opportunities for young people. And as a pillar champion specifically on social progress, I'll be working heart and soul with the people responsible across the different offices, ministries and agencies to ensure that we deliver on the targets.
Let's take one slight step back. As far as the first plan is concerned, you highlighted that there were independent intervening variables that hampered the accomplishment of those noble goals. Those will always be there. How are you going to ensure this time around that you do accomplish the goals?
So there were about 4 trends pre-COVID, if we look at them. There was a rising amount of unemployment in key sectors, particularly youth unemployment, tourism, aviation, manufacturing had gone into deindustrialization, and agriculture because of the drought. We were also seeing that there was improvements in the level of poverty across the country in terms of the margin. However, there was a structural stubbornness in our ability to close the disparity gap in wealth and income inequality. And that's because of asset poverty and social mobility and the inability of families to really have transgenerational social mobility. So what we did for the first HPP when it concluded is we took stock and we conducted an audit and said, what is working? It's important to know what is working so that we can continue with that good work. But we also reflected on where the shortcomings were and what were the causes of the shortcomings. And some of our key lessons during the first term have really been the need to strengthen public procurement processes, the need to augment institutional capacity with key expertise, such as the project management principles that we have introduced now for our implementation and execution of government programs, but also just the need to monitor and evaluate programs on a project basis, which is perhaps the lessons that we are applying second time around for a better outcome. You may also ask where the money will come from, and I hope we'll be able to have that
Before we get
conversation.
to the resources, so part of the criticism against what it is that you do and how you do it is that you're just echoing the existing political rhetoric. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think my job is a thankless job. I think public service can be a thankless job, perhaps because we have a duty to also educate the public on the true function and responsibility of the role. But you know, in this type of function, you work in support of the president, and fundamentally, it's an inward-facing function. It's an intergovernmental stakeholder coordination function, primarily policy interpretation, oversight, and making sure that everybody's pulling in the same direction. I've also used the language before to say that I occupy a space where I'm an activist from within, because from my purview, I am a young, black female, usually the youngest in the room, surrounded by policymakers, lawmakers, senior government officials, and technocrats. And I've been preaching a particular gospel about youth empowerment, youth development. And I am persuaded beyond doubt, Denver, that we have made significant strides in mainstreaming, amplifying, and across the board. I believe that we are speaking the same language across government, and the key policymakers have an appreciation for the imperative of youth development and empowerment. And this is thanks to the political leadership of the president, but also thanks to a consistent communication, education, orientation through officials such as myself.
You've placed a lot of emphasis on the oversight responsibility that you also have. So who holds you accountable if that oversight function isn't carried out?
The president was elected by a single constituency, and he received an overwhelming mandate. Initially 87%, now 56%. Young people made a significant contribution to the mandate of the president. And as the president accounts to his single constituency, we account to the president. Ultimately, we are public servants and we hold ourselves accountable to the republic.
We'll take another short break and then one-on-one will continue. Welcome back. This is One-on-One with me, Kisting. This evening, we're engaging Daisry Mathias, Presidential Advisor on Youth Matters and Enterprise Development. Ms. Mathias, young people are increasingly becoming more and more vocal in pressing for opportunities. How would you address that pressure, calling for overnight change within the country?
I think the country is at a pivotal place in its trajectory. We have matured a lot in our political, economic, social character over the 31 years, but we're seeing a larger and larger engagement and participation of young people, especially in the socio-political aspects. And I think it is welcome. I think that activism is an important part in a vibrant, functioning democracy. I think that young people have a role to play in holding elected leaders accountable and reminding them of the commitments and the promises that we as development practitioners make. And I also think that it is important that it goes beyond activism and into an integrated, continuous dialogue, a structured dialogue mechanism where we can really benefit from the contributions of young people. I have seen through some of the movements like the Shut It All Down movement, the value, the clarity of mind, the lucid policy proposals that can be put forward by young people, and how when they're integrated into government programs, they can actually be very effective policy responses. So I do think that it is a necessary transition. I see young people are looking up to their leaders, but they're not only looking up to their leaders for leadership, they're also making decisions, I believe, about who they want to lead them tomorrow.
Do elected leaders take kindly to being held accountable? Do they take members of the youth seriously with the recommendations that they are making?
Of course. They are elected, they are representatives, they are given a mandate by the sovereigns. And that mandate is you go to State House and represent the issues that are important to me. And I have a social contract with you. After 5 years, you come back and you report on the progress that you have made and what it is that you have achieved on my behalf. It's a trust that we dare not betray.
And what happens within those 5 years, as far as accountability specifically is concerned?
I think with President Geingorb's tenure, we have seen the principles of accountability and transparency entrenched deeply, profoundly, and possibly permanently into Namibia's governance architecture. He has really upheld the governance principles of transparency, accountability, accessibility, and you will attest, Denver, of the accessibility of the State House and this administration to the media, to the public, and the access of information.
With respect, you seem to advocate for what the president does all the time. Is that part of your responsibility?
You will be surprised that there have been incidents where it has been challenging to reconcile personal views with a collective decision. It is not always that as an advisor you become a yes man. I think the wealth and the hallmark of an advisor is to provide perspectives that a leader might not have. It's about diversity, it's about representation, but it's also about the courage of conviction and sometimes demonstrating political courage to say the unpopular thing because it is the thing that needs to be heard.
Is it what you do?
Absolutely.
Very well. As we're moving towards the end of our conversation this evening, if we were to gaze in a crystal ball, Just imagine that. Where do you see this country of ours in the next 10 years?
I have hopes, Denver. I know that we have possibly been through the worst in our recent history, economically, and it's becoming social, and it can also have political ramifications. But I believe that there is opportunity for a reset. I do believe that Namibia will be able to overcome. I have seen that we have overcome greater challenges in our past, and I believe that we have the endurance, we have the resilience to overcome the challenges that are facing us today. I've been fortunate to travel the length and the breadth of this country. I've had conversations at almost every constituency in this country, and I am reassured by the hope that is on the ground, by the determination, the conversations that I've had with young people. And I believe that our better days are ahead of us. I believe that Namibia's future shines brighter, and I believe that we will be able to come out of this crisis stronger.
Notwithstanding the criticism against you and your office, what is the legacy that you'd like to be remembered for?
The legacy I would like to be remembered for is inextricably linked to the legacy that the President has made a commitment to, and that is because my work is to support the realization of the vision of the President. I believe in the vision of a united Namibian House. I believe in a prosperous Namibia. I believe in inclusive growth. I believe in sharing. I also believe in the empowerment and development of young people to lead the tides of change that Namibia must enter in the next frontier.
For a young person watching us this evening and thinking, I don't believe that, what do you have to say for them? A young person watching us this evening say, I don't believe what you're saying. What do you have to say to them?
I would say that time will tell. I would say that this is a legacy that is still unfolding. We are 6 years in out of 10 years. It's not over yet. Over the first term, we have been able to accomplish some important successes. President Geingob has been able to provide some consequential leadership on national debates and broker difficult conversations. Things like the Second Land Conference. These are important conversations that affected young people. The President has been intentional in inclusivity, demonstrated. The President has shared growth even when the economy was at its lowest. It's demonstrated through the investment on TVET, food bank, intensification of social grants. What we are focused on now with a laser-sharp focus, and that is the legacy that we want to leave behind for young Namibians, young and old, is an economic recovery, sustainable economic recovery trajectory.
Time will indeed tell. What does the future hold in conclusion for Daisry Mathias?
Well, I have certainly come to find my vocation in the public service. I was in private sector before, but I have found fulfillment in service to the Namibian people. And I believe that in the future, I will be serving a public servant in one capacity or another.
Thank you very much and best of luck. And that concludes this edition of One on One. This evening, we engaged Daisry Mathias, Presidential Advisor on Youth Matters and Enterprise Development. Goodbye.